All right, so we're diving deep today, going way back to colonial America.
Early Virginia colony, to be exact.
Okay, so Virginia, 1640.
Yep.
And we're looking at,
One of the first, officially documented slave rebellions.
I think when a lot of people, well, at least when I think of slave rebellions, I think of huge uprisings.
Right, big dramatic events.
Yeah, like Haiti.
Yeah, exactly. And those are obviously incredibly important to understand.
Of course.
But what's interesting about this early rebellion is it shows that resistance, like the fight for freedom, it was there from the very beginning.
Right from the start.
Yeah, even when the system of slavery was just starting to take hold.
Which is kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
It really is. It makes you question, how quickly slavery became entrenched in the colonies.
And how people fought back even then against incredible odds.
Absolutely. And what's even more interesting is that this rebellion wasn't just enslaved Africans. It was a mixed group.
Yeah, there were indentured servants involved too, right?
Yeah. Right. So you have Africans and Europeans coming together, united by this, desire for freedom.
That's powerful.
It is. It really highlights how oppressive the system was, that people from different backgrounds, facing different circumstances, they were still willing to risk everything for a chance at liberty.
Okay, so before we get into the rebellion itself, can you remind us, what was going on in Virginia in the 1640s? What was the situation with slavery and indentured servitude?
Sure. So in the 1640s, Virginia was undergoing a major shift. In the early days, they relied heavily on indentured servants.
Right, people who basically worked off their debt for a certain number of years, and then they were free.
Exactly. But as the colony grew and the demand for labor increased, they started moving away from that system.
Towards a more permanent workforce.
Yeah. Sadly, that's exactly what happened. Race-based slavery started taking root, where Africans were seen as, property.
And their status was passed down through generations.
Right. It was no longer a temporary condition. It was a lifetime sentence.
Which is just horrifying.
Absolutely. And this shift was driven by a number of factors.
Like what?
Well, the growing demand for labor was a big one. But also, there was this growing racial prejudice.
Where Africans were seen as inherently inferior.
Right, which tragically justified their enslavement in the eyes of many colonists.
So this is the backdrop against which this rebellion takes place.
Exactly. And it's important to understand that context to really grasp the desperation and the courage of those involved.
So tell me about this group. Who were these individuals?
Unfortunately, the historical record is pretty sparse when it comes to specific names and details.
Right. It's hard to piece together those individual stories sometimes.
Yeah, but we do know that this group, this alliance of enslaved Africans and indentured servants, they decided they weren't going to just accept their fate.
They were going to fight back.
They planned this daring escape, aiming to reach Maryland, which at the time was seen as a bit more tolerant.
Like a haven, a potential place of freedom.
Exactly. And just imagining their journey, the risks they were willing to take, it's incredible.
It really speaks to their determination.
And their hope, even in the face of such a brutal system.
So what happened? Did they make it to Maryland?
Tragically, no. Their plan was discovered before they could reach freedom.
Oh, man.
They were captured and swiftly punished.
And this is where the story of John Punch comes in, right?
Yes, John Punch was an enslaved African man who was part of this rebellion.
And his case is often seen as a pivotal moment in the history of slavery in America.
It is, because his punishment was significantly different from that of the European indentured servants who participated in the same rebellion.
Wait, so even though they were all involved in the same act of defiance?
Yep, they all tried to escape together.
The punishment wasn't equal?
It wasn't, and that's where the racial disparity in the legal system becomes really clear.
So what happened to John Punch?
He was sentenced to a lifetime of servitude, essentially solidifying his status as a slave for the rest of his life.
Wow, so he was made an example of...
In a way, yes. His case is seen as one of the earliest examples of slavery being formally codified into law in America.
And what about the indentured servants? How are they punished?
They received extended terms of servitude, but they weren't condemned to lifelong slavery like John Punch.
So even though they committed the same crime, the color of their skin determined their fate.
Sadly, that's what the historical record shows, and it highlights how race was becoming the defining factor in one's destiny.
It's just heartbreaking.
It really is, and it shows how this rebellion, though ultimately unsuccessful, was a turning point in the history of slavery in America.
That's like this small, localized event had these huge ripple effects.
Absolutely. And it forces us to reconsider how we understand the history of slavery,
Mm.
to look beyond the big dramatic events and see the everyday acts of
And
resistance.
the individuals who risked everything for a chance at freedom.
Exactly. Their stories might not be as well known, but they're just as important to remember.
So, what can we take away from this deep dive? What should our listeners be thinking about as they go about their day?
Well, I think it challenges us to think about the legacy of slavery, how it's not just a distant historical event, but something that continues to shape our society today.
Yeah, the echoes of the past are still felt in the present.
And it reminds us that the fight for equality and justice is ongoing, that there's still work to be done.
Absolutely. We can't forget the stories of those who came before us, who fought for a better future.
And we have to honor their sacrifices by continuing to push for a more just and equitable world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks. It makes you wonder, what would have happened if that rebellion had succeeded?
Right, or if John Punch hadn't been singled out for such a harsh punishment.
It's impossible to know for sure, but it's definitely something to think about.
Counterfactual history.
Exactly, and it shows how even seemingly small events can have a huge impact on the course of history.
And it makes you wonder, what other stories of resistance are out there, waiting to be uncovered?
Exactly. There's so much we still don't know about the past, so many voices that have been silenced.
And it's our responsibility to seek them out, to listen to their stories, and to learn from them.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive, and I hope our listeners learned something new today.
Me too. It's been a pleasure discussing this with you.
Likewise, and to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this journey into the past.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.
And keep fighting for a better future.
Here. All right, that's a wrap.
Sounds good.